Greetings, I bid you welcome to the Monster's Den. I am Pete Pardo, your host from Sea of Tranquility. Happy Sunday, everybody. Thanks for joining for another fun-filled episode of Monster Delights. Today we're going to take a look at not only one of my favorite films of all time, it's definitely one of my favorite horror movies or monster movies of all time, but also, like I said, one of my favorite films of all time, 1954's Toho Pictures production of Godzilla, or Gojira, as they say in Japan, right? One of the bleakest films you'll ever see in its original form. Okay, so we're not going to talk about the U.S. version, okay, with actor Raymond Burr thrown in throughout the film, which completely changed the kind of feel of the entire film. All right, we're not going to talk about that. I grew up on that film. All right, I grew up on the American version with Raymond Burr. Remember watching that for many, 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 many years, thinking, "Oh, this is great." And then, the 50th anniversary of this film originally being made, what they did was they released the original Japanese uncut version, limited run in theaters around the U.S., and I happened to go see it in a very small, old school theater in Suffern, New York, with a buddy of mine, seeing the original uncut Japanese film for the first time ever in a theater, and it absolutely blew me away. It's a completely different film, and that's the film we're going to be talking about today, not the Raymond Burr version. So if you have not seen the original Japanese version with English subtitles, I'm going to tell the whole story here, so I'm going to give it all away. So if you're afraid of spoilers, my recommendation would be to partially listen to this video and then go out and watch it. I'm sure most people have seen at least the Raymond Burr version, so you know how the film ends, but I'm going to get into some kind of nitty-gritty stuff of what happened throughout the film that you may not get from the American version, right? So this here is the deluxe DVD reissue. This has also been released on Criterion Blu-ray, which I don't have. I may have to get that at some point. But a fantastic film. So again, Toho Pictures, 1954. All right, black and white. Basically, Toho, who since has been known as a giant creature company, right? Making these great kaiju films, which are basically giant monster films. They've made a ton of them. The Godzilla franchise is now the longest running film franchise of all time. 1954, that's when the first film came out. They're still making Godzilla movies today. Right? Doesn't get much better than that, right? So, but greatly influenced by some of the films made in the U.S. and Britain before, a decade or two before. So, of course, you had King Kong, Son of Kong, Mighty Joe Young, right? You had a lot of the kind of giant insect and all that kind of stuff films happening right around that same time, Giant Behemoth and, all this kind of stuff. The Ray Harryhausen stuff was just starting to happen. And, Toho wanted to kind of jump into the fray here. So what they did was they, and again, we're only a few years, 1954, we're only a few short years after the end of World War II, dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan, right? A lot of horrific stuff going on in that time period, still fresh in everybody's mind. So what Toho did is they really kind of honed in on that whole period, that dark day in human history, okay, and kind of permeates this entire film. This is like I said, one of the bleakest films you'll ever see. It's dark, it's horrific, okay, because that's the one thing. The Raymond Burr Americanized version really does not do this film, the original version of this film, justice, because this is a film you watch, it's dark, it's depressing, it's horrific, it's like, apocalyptic, whatever you want to call it. This is not a happy film by any means. There ain't nothing happy going on in this movie at all. And the original version, like I said, with the English subtitles is the way to go here. So basically, filmed, released 1954 for 100 million yen, which roughly equates to about 900K US dollars. Go figure. All right. It wound up bringing in about $2 million U.S. box office. Okay, that's kind of like tallied around the globe, I guess. a film known for a lot of different special effects, right? So the special effects director was Aichi Tsubaraya. Okay, I'm probably saying that wrong. Directed by Ishiro Honda, and with amazing score, the film score, by Akira Ifukubi, all right, who will forever be known for the dun 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 dun. I mean, it's just iconic film score music, you know, and just man, all throughout this film, the ominous sounds coming, you know, the boom, boom, you know, the Godzilla roar, right? Which, for those of you who don't know, the Godzilla roar was created using a cello, okay? The bow across the cello strings, recorded, amplified, manipulated, boom, there you have Godzilla's roar, all right? Listen to it carefully, especially from the early films. Definitely can hear that resonance. It's a stringed instrument, okay? Starring in this film, what do we got in this film? So we got Akira Takurada as Hideto Ogata in the starring role. He played a very prominent role in many Toho giant monster films going forward. This was his, pretty young in this movie. You got Momoko Kochi as Emiko Yamane, okay, his love interest in the film. You got Akihiko Hiratu as Dr. Daisuke Serizawa, okay. You got Takashi Shimura as Dr. Kiyoshi Yamana, the father of Emiko. Okay, and then you got in the Godzilla suit, okay, because again, we could talk a little bit about the kind of creation of this film. So Toho, and specifically Japanese film production companies, when they were making these giant monster films, instead of taking the, what was then starting to become a pretty common route of creating these giant monsters by using stop motion photography with models like Ray Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien did, they decided instead of going that route, we're going to build these gigantic rubber monster suits to have actual actors sit inside of and act out everything, along with small-scale models for buildings and cars and tanks and planes and all that kind of terrain and all that kind of stuff. So basically, the actors in the rubber suits would then go onto sets that were all made of miniatures. Okay, and while this film, and I believe Godzilla Raids Again, the second film, and possibly even King Kong vs. Godzilla, there was a small amount of stop-motion photography with little miniature figures used. It was minimum. It was more of the guys in the rubber suits, as well as the use of maquettes, which are basically like small puppets, okay? Which, so like in this particular film, there are many scenes during the movie where they would show like close-ups of Godzilla, and you could see looked a little different than the guy in the suit, right? Looked a little different, a little smaller, right? So these maquettes basically would be like kind of, maybe like from chest area up, with the arms, and they would be hand control from underneath, and basically, the mouths would move, the neck would move, and the arms would move. So a lot of the close-up shots in this film of Godzilla, like peering over things or shooting out the atomic breath, those would be close-ups, and that would be the maquette. So that would be operated from underneath, and you could kind of tell, right, because it looks a bit different than the guy walking around the rubber suit. But Toho, this is what Toho did, and they had their own. You knew a Toho film when you saw it, right? Based on their use of all of these things. In the Godzilla suit, you have Katsumi Tezuka as well as Haru Nakajima. Okay, so they used two different actors in the suit throughout this film. Those two folks, Haru Nakajima, appeared in 12 consecutive Godzilla or Godzilla-related giant monster films, and Mr. Tezuka also appeared in quite a few different Toho films underneath the rubber suits, as well as doing odd little roles throughout the film. All right, so kind of interesting there. All right, so as for the plot, so basically the film starts off, they show you a ship out to sea, right, doing whatever it is they're doing, right? All of a sudden you see they show kind of like this bright light from under the water nearby, right? This kind of like explosion. Next thing you know, all the people on the ship are freaking out. They're trying to send SOS message, whatever, and then boom, the ship goes up in flames, sinks down to the bottom. What happened, right? So back in the mainland, of course, the military gets the SOS. They send search parties out to find, what happened there. Can't find nothing. This one of the search boats also goes disappearing. The same type of thing happens. A fishing ship off the coast of Odo Island, which is a small island, I guess, somewhere off the coast of Tokyo, Japan. Fishing ship, same thing happens, but some survivors from some of these wrecked ships do wind up kind of washed back ashore. Okay, they're all terrified. Oh my God, it was awful, all this kind of stuff. So they're trying to figure out what's causing all these ships to kind of, sink and go off the radar and disappear and all that kind of stuff. So one after another. So then they kind of, the next part of the film kind of centers on what's going on in this Odo Island, which is nearby where all this stuff is happening. And the villagers are finding out about all these, ship disappearances and their fishing boats disappearing. One guy does come back and he's telling a story about this giant animal. It was horrible, whatever. So all of the locals on the Odo Island are like constantly like watching out in the water, watching and waiting. And then you got this older gentleman, okay, who starts, screaming about, this giant creature from the legends called Gojira. Godzilla's coming, he's going to wreck, he's coming to have his revenge and so on and so forth. And it's kind of ominous. So the people are kind of like, is this guy serious or what's he talking about here? But meanwhile, none of the fishermen can bring back any fish. Okay. Something's going on there in the water, right? So, next thing you see, like the military and a bunch of scientists, they come to the island to find out, what's actually going on over there. They come in via helicopter shortly after they land, and they start, talking to the townspeople, whatever. This horrific storm hits the island. It's like a hurricane, right? So in the middle of the night, storm hits, raining, pouring, wind like crazy. You hear the boom, boom, right? Houses are falling down, all this kind of stuff. It's havoc. So it's like, but you don't really see anything. You don't know what's going on, but you get a couple people they look up, they see something, they're screaming, right? So the next day, everything's in ruin. The whole island just in ruins, houses and huts ruined all over the place. People saying it was not a hurricane, right? So additional scientists and military people come to the island, okay? Here's where they start introducing, our cast. So basically, and there's a little kind of like romantic subplot going on throughout this entire film. So you've got Dr. Yamane and his daughter, what is her name? Emiko. So Dr. Serizawa is actually almost like a protege of Dr. Yamane, right? He's a scientist as well. And apparently, because he's been around the family for so long, back in the old days, a lot of arranged marriages, right? So basically, it's been kind of arranged that Dr. Serizawa would marry Dr. Yamane's daughter, Emiko, right? But she always saw him more of as kind of like, like a big brother type of figure. So there's really not a lot of romance going on there, but it's just that's what eventually is going to happen. But meanwhile, she has fallen in love with Ogata, whose first name is Akira. No, I'm sorry, Hideto Ogata, right? They always kind of call them by their last names here, which is kind of weird. And so they secretly have fallen in love, but they're trying to figure out a way so they can break this news to her father, the professor, that she does not want to marry Serizawa. She wants to marry Ogata, right? So that's that whole subplot is simmering throughout this movie. It keeps kind of coming in and out of the plot, right? So you got all these, so them and all these other scientists come to the island, right? And they're trying to figure out what's going on. They see these gigantic impressions along the beach, okay, which look like giant footprints. And so they're testing, and all this. They have the radioactive test kits. Why they thought to bring that, I don't know. But, again, this is the time where all this kind of atomic testing is going on and blasting and all that kind of stuff. So they're testing all these kind of imprint areas for radioactivity, and, of course, they do. They also find the fossil of an old, like prehistoric, like insect type of thing that was laying in one of the footprints, probably attached to the bottom of Godzilla's foot, right? So they're starting to think, well, something really weird is going on here. It's because the radioactivity is showing up big time in the footprints. Okay, so then, a few minutes later, you start hearing that pounding again. Every time you hear the pounding in this film, that means Godzilla is on the way, right? Foreshadowing. So you hear the dome, dome, dome. everybody starts freaking out, right? So they're like, oh no, the creature, he's here, and like what? So they go like running up this hill. And as they're running up the hill, because apparently whoever it is or whatever it is has been spotted on the other side of the island. So it's one of my favorite parts of the film. And this is in broad daylight. The only actual scene in the entire film where Godzilla makes an appearance in daylight is this part. So there are crowds of people, scientists, locals, they're all going up the side of the hill. And then at the other, you hear the roar, right? You hear that cello, right? And on the other side of the hill, coming up above, you see the face of Godzilla with the big roar. And of course, here is that this particular scene, when you see these kind of up shots of the monster, that's actually the maquette, right, the puppet. Okay, so you can see Godzilla's head for the first time in the film come up over the hill. People are horrified. They start running back down, whatever, trying to take pictures, all that kind of stuff. But then he goes back into the water, right, and that's that. So now they go, all these scenes with all the scientists and all the world, the leaders and the government and all this kind of stuff, and they're analyzing the pictures they were taking, all that kind of stuff, and they figure out that Godzilla is this creature that kind of became somewhere between the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods of the dinosaurs, kind of like a mixing of a couple different kinds of species, right? They're saying he's probably 50 feet tall, or 50 meters tall, which I'm not quite sure exactly how tall that is. Pretty damn tall. And again, it's a new species, kind of created over time, and that obviously millions of years old, somehow was reawakened from all the nuclear detonations and bombings that have been going off since World War II, and after that somehow he was in suspended animation somewhere under the ocean, and all this stuff kind of awoken him, right? So again, the atomic bomb stuff, it's fresh, and this whole movie, that's the backdrop to this entire movie. And all this radioactivity was absorbed into the body of Godzilla, and that's why as he's walking around, he's leaving his radioactive footprints everywhere, right? So, then there's all this debate amongst all the people, the Japanese people, or do we make this discovery public knowledge? Do we keep it hidden so as not to bring a panic and all that stuff? And there's a lot of arguing back and forth. They decide to set up a counter Godzilla headquarters where they try to figure out how are we going to deal with this creature. And meanwhile, nothing really much has happened yet in the film other than the ships being destroyed, okay, and parts of the island being destroyed. So here, they decide, all right, probably not a great idea, to send out the naval fleets and start dropping depth charges all over the ocean and the bay area around Odo Island. Okay, now common sense probably dictates that, there's maybe a small chance that that might bother this big creature or kill it, but since we really don't know a lot about him, probably a big chance, and maybe it'll just piss him off, right? Well, that's exactly what happens. So they do all these depth charges, right? It doesn't really work. Next scene is a nighttime scene somewhere off the Tokyo Bay, and you got this like one of those little party ships, whatever, everybody's on. It's like restaurant on there, nightclub, and people out there drinking and all, having a grand old time, whatever. And that's when you see for the first time Godzilla come up out of the water near the ship. All right, everybody sees him. Oh my God, freaking out. So now we know that Godzilla is just off the coast of Tokyo, right? So pretty cool scene. Then they show a scene where Emiko goes to Serizawa's lab. So, Emiko and Ogata are talking about how they can break the news that, they want to get married, whatever. So she agrees she's going to go talk to him. And so she goes with a reporter who's got questions about his experiments and all that kind of stuff. And after the reporter leaves, she has a discussion with him, and she wants to break the news about how she's in love with Ogata. But he, says, I want to show you some stuff that I've been working on. So he finally agrees to show her what he's been working on. And so in a sense, what he's working on is this weapon called the oxygen destroyer, which basically, if used, wipes out all of the oxygen, in this case in the water, okay, and anything living that's in the area where this is released basically asphyxiates. Okay, so he actually shows her, he's got a big fish tank, he drops a little oxygen destroyer tab into the water, and the the water boils and the fish just die. They're only skeletons. She's absolutely horrified. And he tells her that you have to keep this secret. You cannot tell anybody about this, because if this gets into the wrong hands, it can be horrible. But there's got to be a way that I can use this for the benefit of mankind, type of thing, right? That's kind of his idea here. So next thing we know is so she goes back. And again, she's upset because she wasn't able to talk to Serizawa about the fact that she wants to marry Ogata and all this kind of stuff. But then she gets back with her father and her boyfriend, and they're hanging out. They're back in Tokyo, and all of a sudden you hear the Tokyo alarms going off. And of course, Godzilla has arrived in Tokyo Bay and is coming onto the mainland. Okay, he's here. The next sequence, from here on in, the rest of the film is pretty intense. And pretty just a lot of horrific scenes. Again, for the time, when you think about it, 1954, the kind of scenes you see in this film, pretty daring, right? And there's a reason why I think the American film studio decided, to change things around a little bit to not make it so quite horrific, because it really is. So the army's waiting there for him there. He's coming out of the water. They're firing away. It's not doing anything. You got the incredible music score just booming over the background by Fukubi. Just fantastic. The scene of him, the train coming along full of commuters and everything like that, coming off of work, and him smashing the train and picking it up and grabbing. It's just horrible stuff, but you can't take your eyes off it, right? And what's really interesting is like all of these nighttime scenes, because the rest of the movie is all filled with these just horrific acts of destruction by Godzilla all at night, and it's perfectly filmed. You can see everything, and it just makes it that much more impactful. You start to hear him roaring quite a bit now. Okay, you start to hear him, shooting out the atomic breath, just firing everything up and what have you. And it's just the carnage and the destruction begins, and this kind of is the theme for the rest of the film. Then they show like. The next day, because apparently he went back into the water again. The next day, the army getting ready. They're setting up all this stuff. They're putting up all these giant electrical lines all around around Tokyo Bay. So when he comes out of the water that they'll be able. They're thinking that'll stop him, right? They're showing like all sorts of people in the hospitals already, because obviously of the damage he did the night before. People trying to evacuate the city. All this stuff is going on. Okay, but of course, Professor Yamane is upset because he is a scientist, he's a zoologist, and he wants to find a way for them to not have to kill Godzilla, to be able to study him, because it's a pretty, here's this giant creature from millions of years ago who now is alive and doing it. It's like there's got to be a way that we can contain him and be able to study him. And basically he's the only one who's thinking that. Everybody else is like, how can we kill this creature, right? So he's he's having a conversation with Ogata, who wants to ask for Emiko's hand in marriage, but he decides to get into this conversation and say, well, I agree with the government. We need to kill Godzilla. It's the only way. And Professor's like, I can't believe you're taking that side. Get out of here. You need to leave my house if you're going to think that way, type of thing. And he's like, oh, man, I blew it, right? I blew it. I wanted to ask for her hand in marriage, and now he doesn't even want to talk to me because of this, right? So that's happening. And then, of course, that night, pounding starts again. Godzilla comes back out of the water, ready for attack number 2 on Tokyo. And this time, of course, they think, all right, so they got all the tanks and all the heavy artillery behind the electrical lines. So like, all right, so hopefully he won't get through those electrical lines. And if he does, we're ready for him. Well, he goes right through the electrical lines. He starts firing out the atomic breath, burning them all down, burning the tanks. All this kind of stuff. So here you have all this great use of miniatures, right? So you got the actors in the giant suit, in the big rubber suit, rampaging through this carefully constructed Tokyo. All right, with all the little miniature tanks and artillery, okay, buildings, all that stuff. Very well done. This next sequence is just really, really well executed. Goes through the wires, nothing's stopping him, burns down a part of the city. There's flames everywhere. The whole part of Tokyo is in absolute chaos. Okay, there's a couple of scenes where they show like crowds of people like running down the streets, and he's coming down and fires the the flame on them, burn them to a crisp. I mean, it's like this kind of stuff was not really, didn't see a lot of this stuff back in that time. This is pretty heavy stuff for 1954. There's also a crazy scene of a mother and her 3 little children cowering in a street corner. They don't know where to go, what to do. The kids are crying, and all she keeps saying is, "We're going to join your father soon. We're going to join your father soon." Obviously, he died somewhere, right? And it's just like, it's like, oh my God, right? And then, basically, they show this shot of Tokyo, okay? The sea of flames with the shadow of Godzilla walking around the back, just kind of finishing up what he's doing. It's crazy stuff. I mean, it's just. And I remember seeing this in the theaters, and I was like, holy cow, this is some dark shit, people, right? But then finally the Air Force comes in. So the Air Force comes in, all the planes come in, they're just firing away, and they're just pelting him. It's not really doing much to him, but it's annoying him enough to drive him back into the bay. So finally they think, wow, a little bit of success, right? We got him to stop the rampage. So, by between all the planes firing away at him, he goes back into the bay, all right? Things kind of quiet down a little bit. But then they show like a daytime shot over in the morning of Tokyo just in complete ruins. And you have to wonder if that was actually a shot of what Japan looked like after the bomb dropped at the end of World War II, if this was something that they created on the set, but really, really eerie and creepy. All right, the devastation. All right, they did a great job of kind of really giving you that vision right there. So the next bunch of scenes are very, they're almost hard to watch. They show the scenes where, Amiko is volunteering and they're in the hospitals and there's people hurt and dying and children all over the place. And she just can't take it. And she's like, she knows of this creation that Serizawa has put together. And she's like, I know that could help possibly kill Godzilla. And she's like, I know I made him a promise never to tell anybody about it, but I can't. After all this devastation I've seen, all this suffering, so she goes to Ogata and says, I have to tell you something. And then she reiterates the whole story, okay, about going to his lab and seeing all this kind of stuff. I feel terrible. I told him I would never say anything, but we have to convince him that he's got to use this. So she and Ogata go to his laboratory to confront him about it. And at first he denies it. And then he knows that she obviously told him, right? So he's like, there's no way I can use this. There's no way I can use this, right? This can never be, gotten into the wrong hands for anything. I can't unleash this on the world. It's not ready. And so he and Ogata get into like a little fight, right? They get into a little scuffle. Eventually, he seems like he's kind of coming around. I'm sorry, they hit each other and all this kind of stuff. But then they have a TV on in the background. This is like another one of the most chilling scenes in the film, where whatever TV show, it's a news show, goes to a school where you have a bunch of young children in like a choir. There's a ton of them. They're all singing this very somber, ominous song, okay? And the 3 of them are watching this. And you can see like Serizawa, it's a very mournful song. Obviously, it, has probably something about prayers and, get us through that, whatever it is. And Serizawa finally says, okay, I will do this. But my creation can never get into the hands of anybody else after this. This will be the one and only time it's ever going to be used. So he takes all of his notes and all the plans that he used to create the Oxygen Destroyer, and he burns it. And then he agrees that he will go talk with the scientists and the government about going and using this against Godzilla. So basically how it goes from there is that they agree that, first of all, Ogata was going to be the one to go down and bring it down into the bay to find where Godzilla is underwater and unleash it. But Serizawa says, no, we will go together, right? So they go down, so they have the suits on and everything like that with the oxygen, all that kind of stuff. They got the ship there in the bay, so they go down, they go all the way down. And then, of course, he's got the Oxygen Destroyer in the canister, right? Serizawa. Ogata's with him as well. They go down, they see Godzilla underwater. He's just kind of chilling out down there, right? He sees that they're down there, so he starts to lumber closer to them. And so the original plan was they were just going to drop the Oxygen Destroyer down, okay, and then go back up and hightail it out of there. But I think Serizawa knew that it's got to actually be released, okay? And they didn't have a function for that. So he basically tells Ogata, okay, we're done, go up. So he yanks on the thing and they pull him up, and he's thinking he's coming right behind, and he's not. So he gets up and he's screaming in the intercom down below. He goes, Serizawa, Serizawa, Serizawa. Meanwhile, he had no intention of coming up. So what he basically does is he waits for Godzilla to come closer, okay, releases it, cuts his line, and sacrifices himself to save Japan from the terror of Godzilla. So the final scene, again, very bleak. Basically they're all up on the ship up top. They realize Serizawa's not coming back up because they try to pull him back up and the line is cut. And then the water starts bubbling and all this kind of stuff. And Godzilla comes up briefly. All right, he's struggling. He roars, goes back down. He's basically dead. Then all of a sudden he's turned to bones and laying at the bottom of the ocean. And then the professor, who's upset that they had to kill Godzilla, who's very upset that his protege, sacrificed himself. But then he's like, he says, you got to wonder if we continue to do all this atomic testing and all this kind of stuff, that there might not be another of his same species who might come up and cause trouble at some point. So he says that, of course, at the time, who knows if they knew they were going to make another movie, but as it turns out, there indeed was another Godzilla to come shortly thereafter, right? And Godzilla raids again, which is a story for another time. So, like I said, a great, great film that never gets old, gets better with repeated views, and you got to see the Japanese version. So, if you can, I know there's some people who probably, might have a hard time with, because some of the Japanese language in this film can be a little over the top and loud, a little grating for some people. But just turn the subtitles on. You got to hear the music. You can't just turn the volume off because the music is part of this film. So it's just, and after a while, you just get kind of sucked into the whole thing. It's just really great. And for me, the English version is just almost meaningless at this point and unwatchable. The only way to do it is the original. So hope you enjoyed this half-hour look at Godzilla or Gojira from 1954, Toho Film Productions, one of the best giant monster movies of all time, in my opinion. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're on YouTube all the damn time. If you'd like to catch up on the other episodes of The Monsters Den, please go to our playlist page and check out the Monsters Den playlist. There you'll find all the different horror and monster films we've reviewed so far. Hope you enjoy them. There'll be another one coming next week. Haven't figured out what that is yet, but I'll bring you a good one. So remember, The Monsters Den, Universal Horror, Hammer Horror, okay, Vincent Price stuff, Godzilla, Gamera, Halloween / 70s slasher stuff, 50s bad sci-fi films, Ray Harryhausen, you name it. Old horror is special to me, and that's the stuff we're going to be dealing with. All right, guys, so take care, have a good one, and we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.